My name is Amara, and for most of my life, love felt like a joke someone told too loudly in a crowded room, something that made everyone else laugh while I looked for the nearest exit. When I say love, I don't mean the steady, practical kind that shows up with food when you're sick. I mean the breathy, hands-on cheeks kind. The lingering looks and swollen music and people whispering, "I can't breathe without you." I didn't want it. I didn't trust it. I didn't even understand why anyone would want to be seen like that. Mouths open, eyes soft, bodies leaning toward each other as if the ground had tilted and only touching could steady them. I grew up in a house with 4 brothers who announced themselves by the sound of slamming doors and muddy boots. We were always running, after a ball, after one another, after noise. My sister, Kishi, is 2 years younger than I am, and she was the one who learned to braid, to sit still, to paint her toenails a shade called Cherry Promise. I watched her practice perfecting the soft skills of girlhood, like someone pressed against a window. I chose speed, I chose shorts, I chose the field. If love appeared in our house, it was a quick flash, my parents pecking each other in the kitchen when they thought no one was looking. I learned early to sprint past those moments, to pretend I needed water from the farthest tap, to poke my head into the boys' room and ask, "Who's up for 5-a-side?" My mother would sigh and call me back. "Amara, at least greet your father properly," and I would hug him sideways, the way you hold a box you're returning to a store. At school, romance hung like humidity. Girls doodled names into their notebooks, variations of Mrs. Whoever, hearts punctuating the eyes. They whispered in bathrooms and traded lip gloss like contraband. I tried once, applied a glossy coat that smelled like synthetic strawberries, and pressed my lips together, wondering what shape I was supposed to make to look desirable. I caught sight of myself in a cracked mirror and laughed out loud. I wiped it off with the back of my hand and told myself that whatever everyone else was yearning for was a type of hunger I simply didn't have. This is the part where people slide a label across the table. Maybe you like girls. I asked myself that question quietly, then not so quietly. I tried to crush on the prettiest girl in our class, Anita, with her long braids and confident walk. I waited for the thunderclap. Nothing came. Later, at university, curiosity tunneled through my certainty, and I kissed a girl at a party because the music was too loud, and the night felt like an invitation. The kiss was competent. It was also empty, like drinking water when what you wanted was tea. When I kissed a boy a year later, it felt the same. I learned 2 things very quickly. The world likes to force an answer out of you, and some questions are a door that leads you back into yourself. I didn't date. I didn't pretend to. When girlfriends cried over boys who barely tried, I offered practical advice. Block his number, eat, sleep, delete the photos. "You're heartless," one of them said, half joking, half not. "Maybe," I told her, "or maybe just clear-eyed." I took comfort in being useful without understanding. I was a good bench, a good shoulder, a good driver on nights when everyone else had been drinking and grief made the road look like a river. People began to say I was not romantic the way they'd say someone was not allergic to nuts. A fact, a relief. If I thought about marriage at all, it was as a dare from the future. "Will you even marry?" the voice in my head mocked whenever I changed TV channels at the first sign of a kiss. This one that you don't even like hand-holding. This one that thinks affection is a performance. I told that voice the same thing I told my mother when she said I'd outgrow my love for football. We'll see. Years folded into new years. My brothers grew tall and left home in staggered departures, apprenticeships, travel, a job in Abuja. Kishi learned winged eyeliner and how to pack her hair under a wig without bumps. The house took on the muscle memory of quieter days. My mother started saving recipes on her phone the way other women saved verses. My father began to pray longer at night, his voice a soft hum coming from the sitting room. I learned to braid my own hair, not because I wanted to be pretty, but because anything worth doing should be something you can do for yourself. At university, I flirted with the idea of a crush, like someone standing on a balcony might flirt with the idea of jumping. What would it feel like? Would the air hold me for a second before giving me back to the ground? I studied, ran, slept, passed. kept my life simple. I would look at couples and think of them as teams trying to play with one ball. I preferred the clarity of rules, the way football made the world legible. If you work, the ball moves. If you move, the game changes. The first time I noticed the word marriage without my shoulders tensing, I was 25 and serving in Ilorin for NYSC. The posting felt random and inevitable, like a number you draw from a bowl that turns out to be exactly yours. I didn't expect anything from that year except mild inconvenience and a few stories about power outages. Then I met Say. He is not the kind of man you write poetry about. Or rather, not the kind of man I thought poetry was for. Angular, troubled, full of storm. Say is the type of steady you don't notice until your feet remember what it means to stand. I met him at our CDS meeting because he laughed at the wrong time. The coordinator had told a joke so tired it could barely drag itself across the room. Everyone was polite, the way you are when an elder tries. Say laughed late and loud, as if he had just understood a private twist the rest of us had missed. I looked over and saw a face that didn't apologize for its own amusement. It made me curious. He caught me watching. "Sorry," he mouthed, a grin cutting through the apology. After the meeting, he walked beside me and said, "That joke was ridiculous." And I said, "Your laugh was worse." And that was how the door opened, without grand music, without a sunset, just two people making room for banter. When he asked if I watched football, I said, "Do I look like somebody who only watches highlights?" He laughed again, correctly timed this time. "Viewing center on Saturday?" he asked, careful, like someone holding out a fragile cup. "Fine," I said, "if you're not one of those fans who shout advice at the screen." Saturday arrived in the way Saturdays do, lazy and hopeful. The viewing center smelled like a universe I understood. Sweat, beer, peppered meat. Men argued with their hands, palms slicing the air. A little boy in an oversized jersey chased a punctured ball across the dusty edge of the room, his joy as bright as the noon sun. Say bought me a malt without asking what I wanted, then waited to see if I would accept it. I did. He didn't watch my mouth when I drank. He watched the pitch. I liked that more than I could say. We talked through the game like people fluent in the same language. I forgot to be suspicious. I forgot to edit myself into someone smaller, softer, more palatable. When our team scored, I grabbed his forearm without thinking and shook him like a bell. He didn't flinch. He shouted, then looked at me with a surprise that wasn't admiration, just delight. My brothers had looked at me like that my whole life, as if I had always belonged. By the end of the match, I knew 4 things. Say hated wasteful possession, he believed in counterattacks, he couldn't stand lazy defending, and he had never once told any woman to smile. I could work with that. We began to trail one another's weeks with small practical threads. Viewing center? Which pitch are you using for 5-a-side? I found a place that sells suya without pretending it's filet mignon. He trusted my taste in food. I trusted his assessment of a defense line. We became predictable to each other in that gentle way that feels like shade on hot days. At some point, the women in my lodge started to say, "Your person is here," when Sei arrived. I told them he wasn't my person, and they nodded like people who knew better. I didn't call it love. I called it permission, to be a girl who didn't care about mascara, to be a person who didn't apologize for winning a tackle against men who assumed I'd be careful with my steps. Sei never asked me to be pretty. He never asked me to be softer than I felt. He did one thing that had always been rare. He met me where I stood and didn't try to move me an inch. I brought him home once, partly as an experiment, and partly because experiments are how I learned everything worth learning. My brothers sized him up in the casual, comedic way men insist is not a ritual. My father asked him what club he supported and nodded solemnly when the answer made sense. My mother watched us move around each other like someone reading instructions to a thing she thought she already knew how to assemble. Kishi whispered later, "He's normal." She meant it as a compliment. Stability is a gift you don't appreciate until life shakes your table. The oddest thing was how the neighborhood aunties reacted. They have a way of sniffing out romance like rain. They began to smile at me as if I had finally found the right shelf in a long, confusing store. "Ah, Amara, you have softened," one said, as if she had discovered a secret I had hidden under my tongue. I wanted to tell her that softness and surrender were not synonyms, but I was too tired to teach a class that day. Instead, I shrugged. "We watch football," I said. "That's all." She smiled like she knew a bigger truth than my words could carry. When Sei proposed, it didn't feel like a drum roll. It felt like someone closing a drawer that had always been meant to hold those particular things. There was no choreographed speech, no rented lights, no strangers recording us for later laughter. We were in his tiny sitting room. The fan hummed and clicked as if it had a cough. He said, "I think we should do this," and I asked, "Do what?" Even though my chest already knew. "Life," he said, "the long version." I didn't cry. I said yes with the clarity of someone ordering food she has tasted 100 times. Later, one of my brothers asked why I hadn't posted anything. "Post what?" I asked. "That you're happy," he said. "I'm busy being it," I told him. Here is the part where I should confess. I didn't fear marriage. I feared spectacle. I feared the way love turns some people into performative versions of themselves. But marriage, the daily, 2 phones charging by 1 socket, arguments about seasoning, bed sheets that need changing, felt like something I could do with both hands behind my back. Steadiness is the one thing I have always believed I could build. Give me routines, and I will make a life. What I didn't expect, what no one warns you about when you're a girl who never learned to practice wanting, is how the body writes its own syllabus. I had touched myself in careful private ways, checking boxes on curiosity. But I had never studied a man's hunger, never watched it clock in on tired nights, never understood how desire behaves like a worker with no off day. People tell you marriage is compromise. They say it like a proverb at the end of a story. What they don't say is that compromise is not a single decision. It's an ecosystem. It's choosing whether to say yes when your body is a closed fist. It's learning how to say no without cutting. It's the quiet math of measuring love in gestures you never had to practice when you were alone. I didn't know any of that yet, not in my bones. I only knew that with Sei, the world stopped feeling like a dare. I could set my bag down inside a room and not calculate the nearest exit. I could make dinner without announcing the efficiency of my chopping. I could laugh, mouth open, and the sound belonged to me. So I walked toward the wedding like a person who sees weather coming and packs an umbrella, not because she plans for disaster, but because she respects rain. On the morning of our traditional, my mother's hands trembled as she tied my jeel. "Tight," I warned, and she laughed. "Ah, Amara, you in your head." I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had not been softened by love so much as steadied by it. My father stood in the doorway with an expression I couldn't read until he cleared his throat. "You look like your grandmother," he said. It was the highest compliment in our family. My grandmother had been a woman people stopped foolishness around. The ceremony was a river. We floated. Sei's eyes found me with an ease that told me the years ahead would not be a scavenger hunt. There was jollof, sweat, money sprayed with the reckless grace of aunties who believed in abundance. I danced in sneakers under the fabric of my wrapper because life is too short to pretend your ankles don't matter. When we sat at the end, legs aching, I thought, I am not afraid. Later, when the last guest had left and the generator coughed itself into quiet, we sat on the edge of a bed that was no longer a symbol. It was a place to sleep. Sei touched my wrist, then my palm, then the inside of my elbow, the way you might touch a new city. Respectfully, eager, but not greedy. I turned off the light because some beginnings are better with fewer witnesses. I did not think of love then. I thought of learning. That has always been my way to anything that scares or bores me. Treat it like a subject with chapters. I imagined we would proceed in sections. Section A, kissing without awkwardness. Section B, hands their purposes. Section C, what do you do with a body that is happy to be touched but rarely hungry for it? The exam would be later. The exam would be the rest of our lives. In the dark, his breath warm on my shoulder, I felt a flicker, not desire exactly, but an opening. I could walk through it, I thought. I could make a home on the other side. When he asked if I was okay, I said, "I'm not scared." It was true. Fear wasn't the problem. Lack of hunger was. But I didn't have those words yet. I had promise and steadiness and the newness of a ring warming to my skin. If anyone had asked me that night what I believed about love, I would have said something sensible and smug. That love was a set of verbs more than a chorus of adjectives. That it was choosing, daily, like a farmer choosing to show up for land that sometimes refuses to yield. I would have been right and wrong. Right about the verbs. Wrong to assume that desire would sit politely and take instruction like a well-raised child. But this is not that night's story yet. This is only the border. On one side stood Amara, who didn't care for romance, who could outrun any soft thing. On the other side waited Amara the wife, who would learn that intimacy is not an enemy to defeat, but a language with grammar you don't argue with if you want to be understood. When I woke the next morning to the sound of Saye humming in the kitchen, a line I had never said aloud formed itself like prayer. I did not think I would ever do this. I did not think I would ever want to. But I have stepped into the water and I am still breathing. The hum became a melody. I smiled into the pillow before my mind remembered to argue. If I am honest, what soothed me most in those first weeks was not sex or the promise of it. It was the way Say moved inside our small space as if it belonged to both of us without negotiation. He made tea without commentary. He didn't rearrange my spices by dominance. He didn't bring home roses to prove a point about romance. He brought home plantain and cut it thick the way I like, then stood over popping oil like a man defending a gate. When he called me wife, it didn't feel like a hat I had to balance carefully so it wouldn't fall. It felt like my name spelled differently. I want to tell you I was ready for everything that came next. The tug on my nightgown when my brain still wanted to talk about the match we had just watched. The way his body asked for me on nights when I would have preferred to read. The first time I said no too sharply and watched the word hit him like a physical thing. I was not ready. I had built a life on neutrality toward desire, and I had married a man for whom wanting was as ordinary as thirst. But readiness is overrated. Willingness is what keeps you from turning every surprise into a wound. I didn't have experience. What I had was a stubborn belief that I could learn, and I loved him. That quiet, unshowy love that makes room at the table and remembers to buy the bread he likes. People talk about falling in love. I think I walked into it, one deliberate step after another, checking my footing, looking up often enough to remember the sky exists. In the years to come, I would miss that walking. I would wish for the map back. But on that first morning, with stew simmering and the fan complaining and his laugh floating under the door, I felt a stillness I had only ever found on football pitches. The moment before the whistle, when everyone stands exactly where they have chosen, and the whole field waits to see who moves first. I had always believed my body was a room I could lock from inside. Marriage taught me that sometimes the key is shared, and learning when to open, when to gently close, and how to speak across the doorway without shouting. That's the work. That's the chapter no one teaches you how to read. You learn it with your mouth full of prayers and your hands open. This is where our story begins. Not with fireworks, not with a swoon, but with a woman who didn't believe in grand gestures, marrying a man who didn't ask for them, and the soft, relentless realization that love, in my body, would never be simple, and desire would not be a guest I could keep waiting in the yard. Sia never asked me to be anything other than myself. That was new. Most people saw me and tried to smooth the edges, the loud laugh, the straightforward talk, the lack of feminine performance. He didn't. He leaned into it. If anything, he seemed amused that I'd spent years building walls when all he wanted to do was sit outside them with a bottle of malt and wait. He accepted me in the small ways that matter. He didn't flinch when I wore baggy jeans to outings. He didn't suggest makeup or comment on my hair, except to ask how long braids took. When I tackled him during a mixed friendly football game and knocked him into the grass, he laughed and pulled me down with him, both of us breathless under the sun, while people watched in disbelief. With him, there was no quiet, constant negotiation of self. I didn't have to adjust the temperature of my personality to make him comfortable. And when he looked at me, I didn't feel like a puzzle. he was trying to solve. Just someone standing in front of him, already enough. When he proposed, there was no kneeling in crowded spaces, no choreographed spectacle. We were in his tiny sitting room one evening, post-match, sweaty from arguing about a ridiculous refereeing decision. The fan hummed like an old man clearing his throat. He turned to me suddenly, serious, but not nervous. "I think we should do this," he said. "Do what?" I asked. "Life," he replied. "The long version?" It wasn't a grand speech, but my chest stilled in a way it never had before. I didn't need fireworks. His voice was steady, his eyes unflinching. I nodded slowly, then smiled. "All right," I said. "Let's do it." We told our families, and everything spun into the strange, colorful madness of a Nigerian wedding season. Relatives calling from nowhere, aunties with opinions about gel sizes, uncles asking Say if he had enough in his pocket. My father gave his quiet approval in the way he does. One long nod and a hand on my shoulder. My brothers grilled Say with mock threats, but they liked him. I could tell by how quickly they included him in their banter. My sister Kishi whispered to me one night, "He really sees you." It wasn't the words, it was the way she said them, as if she was surprised but relieved. I didn't walk into marriage with fear. I walked in like someone stepping into a well-built house, cautious of the corners, but trusting the foundation. I wasn't starry-eyed. I didn't expect perfection, but I believed in what we had, not because it was magical, but because it was real, solid, like earth under my feet. The wedding was a blur of color and heat. I danced in sneakers hidden under my wrapper because I had no patience for aching feet. People said I looked calm, too calm. I was. My heart wasn't galloping toward some romantic ideal. It was steady, like a drum-keeping time. It wasn't until the door closed on our wedding night that I realized there were parts of this journey I hadn't even begun to study. I had avoided sex all my life, partly out of disinterest, partly out of convenience. Sei was my first in every way. During courtship, I'd hidden behind the excuse of no pregnancy before marriage. He never pressured me. He kissed me sometimes, held my hand often, but he waited. I mistook that patience for sameness. I assumed his desire matched my own indifferent rhythm. I was wrong. The honeymoon wasn't some cinematic montage of intertwined bodies under white sheets. It was awkward, tender, surprising. He wanted me, a lot, more than I expected. Sometimes twice a day, sometimes late at night after a long day of activities. His hunger startled me, not because it was aggressive, but because it was constant. For me, desire had always been an occasional guest, something that knocked maybe once a month, if at all. For him, it was like breathing, natural, non-negotiable. When I thought we'd collapse into sleep, he would reach for me, fingers tracing lines on my skin like a language he thought I understood. I didn't, not fluently. At first, I laughed it off. "You don't get tired?" I'd tease. He'd grin sheepishly, like a boy caught sneaking extra meat from the pot. But as weeks turned into months, the difference between us grew louder in the dark. Some nights, I tried to match his energy. I told myself that love meant showing up. I'd let him tug at my nightgown, even when my mind was elsewhere. I'd close my eyes, focusing on the rhythm, telling myself this is what married women do. Other nights, I turned away gently, pretending to be asleep before he reached for me. But there were nights when my patience frayed. One night, months in, he reached for me after we'd both had exhausting days. I was irritated, not with him, but with everything. I wanted silence. I wanted to exist without being touched. So when his hand slid across my thigh, I snapped. I slapped his hand away, not out of cruelty, but instinct. "Not tonight," I said sharply. He froze, pulled back. I didn't see his face clearly in the dark, but I felt the silence settle between us like a heavy quilt. He turned over, said nothing. The next morning he was quiet, too quiet. For the next week, the air between us grew thin. We spoke in clip sentences. He stopped reaching for me at night. The bed felt wider, colder, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw what rejection looked like on his face. I had spent years being the emotionally detached one, the one who never chased, never longed, never burned. But watching him withdraw, not in anger, but in quiet hurt, was like holding a mirror to something I didn't want to acknowledge. His desire wasn't just physical. It was a way he reached for closeness, and I had pushed it away without care. Eventually, I apologized. We sat on the edge of the bed one night, the fan clicking in the background. I mumbled, "I didn't mean to hurt you." He sighed, rubbed his palms together, and said something that has never left me. "You'll never understand what rejection feels like, because I've never rejected you." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. They rippled through me long after. He was right. Every time I reached for him, emotionally, physically, conversationally, he showed up. Every single time. But when he reached for me in ways I wasn't ready to respond to, I pushed back, sharply, without cushioning. Because I thought my lack of desire exempted me from responsibility. It didn't. That conversation didn't magically fix everything, but it cracked something open in me. For the first time, I stopped seeing his libido as an inconvenience to manage, and started seeing it as a language he spoke, a language I had to learn, not to mimic perfectly, but to understand enough so he wouldn't feel alone in it. We found a rhythm, not overnight but slowly, like two people learning to dance with mismatched steps. I began to reject softly, not like a door slammed, but like a curtain drawn. A gentle, "not tonight," followed by a kiss on his forehead. Sometimes I stayed up later, in the sitting room waiting for him to fall asleep first, not out of manipulation, but to avoid snapping. And he, to his credit, learned to read me better. He didn't push when I wasn't in the mood. He started asking with his eyes, instead of assuming with his hands. It wasn't perfect. It still isn't. There are nights when he rolls toward me and I roll away, and the silence stretches. There are nights when I surprise both of us by initiating. There are moments when I envy couples who seem effortlessly matched, like their bodies came pre-programmed to desire at the same pace. But then there are the quiet mornings. After we've argued, after we've compromised, after we've chosen each other in all our imperfect rhythms, when I look at him making tea, humming some off-key tune, and I know why this works. Because love isn't enough, not by itself. I love him deeply, but love doesn't bridge mismatched libidos. Love doesn't automatically translate into flawless communication. What keeps us together isn't some mythical compatibility. It's kindness. It's respect. It's the willingness to adapt without erasing ourselves. 3 years into marriage, I understand this in my bones. Love is the foundation, but foundations alone don't make a home. You need walls, windows, a roof, repairs, a willingness to get your hands dirty when the rain leaks in. We're still learning. Some nights, when he reaches for me, I meet him halfway. Other nights, I rest my head on his chest and whisper, "Tomorrow." And he understands. Balance isn't a fixed point. It's a moving line we keep adjusting together.